Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another founder-led sales stories, where founders who have successfully navigated their founder-led selling journey share with those who are still in the middle of it. I'm Pete Kazanji, author of Founding Sales, the Startup Sales Handbook, and your host. Today we have Lukas Biewald, co-founder of Weights and Biases, the AI developer platform that was recently acquired by CoreWeave. Lukas and his co-founder Chris Van Pelt built Weights and Biases from a simple web hosting experiment tracker to a multi-million-dollar platform used by AI engineers across industries like automotive, finance, healthcare, and agriculture. I'm particularly excited to have Lukas here today because while everyone knows weights and biases in AI now, when they started out back in 2018, that wasn't necessarily the case. And that required quite a bit of founder-led sales to start. Plus, there's not a ton of content available about developer sales motions, and certainly not enough about AI research and ML engineering sales motions. My biggest takeaways from our conversation are Lukas's insights on what he calls the gradient of admiration, focusing on winning over the most respected engineers first, their clever open source integration strategy that put their product exactly where developers needed it, and how they overcame pricing resistance when selling premium price tools to traditionally price sensitive developers. You'll all hear about how they transformed from closing $1,000 deals to landing a $100,000 contract with Fortune 500 companies, all while maintaining their focus on product quality over marketing hype. So with that, here's Lukas. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another founder-led sales stories, where founders who have successfully navigated their founder-led selling journey share with those who are still in the middle of it. We're here with Lukas Biewald, co-founder and CEO of Weights and Biases, the AI developer platform, and now a CoreWeave company. I'm excited to have Lukas here today because while everyone knows weights and biases and AI now, when they started out back in 2018, that was not necessarily the case. And so that required quite a bit of founder-led sales to start. Secondarily, there's not that much content available about developer sales motions, and there's certainly not enough content about AI research, ML engineering sales motions. So I'm eager to get some of the gems on the record here. Weights and Biases was acquired by CoreWeave a few months ago, and ahead of that had a few dozen sellers, but I'm particularly excited to hear about what things were like super early. So Lukas, I'm really glad to have you here. How are you doing?
Honored to be here, Pete.
Honored. Ha. So for folks who maybe are less familiar, maybe you can share a little bit about what problem weights and biases helps solve, and kind of like what the prototypical organization type is, and then who the humans are in the organizations that care to solve that problem.
Totally. So we try to make AI developers, which is an increasingly broad term. It used to be more
You
like,
mean me, vibe
yeah,
coders?
yeah. At this point, everyone. But it kind of started with trying to make AI researchers successful. So the company actually wasn't started with a particular. It started with kind of like a persona in mind, and we actually tried a couple different things. But the first thing that we did that really took off was this thing called experiment tracking, which actually, whenever I talk to sellers, I always say, this is kind of like Salesforce for your AI stuff, right? Because it's like you kind of have the central dashboard where you see like, some charts and graphs and some individual examples of all the things that are happening, like all the, models you're training, how they're doing, and then just like how occasionally you want to go back in time and like see what happened a couple months ago. You might want to look at that, or you might want to look at all the things that you've tried over the last couple months and see how things are trending. So kind of like a central dashboard for all the things that are going on in your world of building and deploying AI models.
Nice. And so I kind of like that because I think oftentimes one of the things that founders can get wrapped around the axle around is, one, they can think that there's a particular problem that needs to be solved, which is not terrible, right? Like, one of the things you want to say, or folks say, is, fall in love with the problem versus like the proposed solution. The worst, of course, the worst, possible scenario can be like a hammer looking for a nail, where you're just like, hey, I have this really clever idea and it's totally right. But I like how
Totally.
you framed that there, where it's like, hey, here's this persona. We know it's going to become more and more important. They're going to have needs. We have intimacy with that persona, especially from your time at Crowdflower and Figure Eight. And like, we are best positioned to handle whatever those needs are using magical
Yeah.
software. Um, I love that. And then and then so early on, so it sounds like that was the first thing that was successful. What was like the average deal size for those transactions? Starting out
Yeah,
like,
it's funny.
4 years
I
ago,
would
five
say
years
our
ago.
like median deal size, probably depending on who you ask, it's probably somewhere between 25 and 50K. And I think it's gone up a little bit, but honestly, that's been like pretty consistent since the beginning. Like it's not like our first deals were there, but you know, probably like our fifth or sixth deal was like 100K, and I would say it's always been tens of thousands of dollars typically. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And and so maybe you can share with, I mean, I hinted at it a little bit, but maybe you can share with folks what your background was before starting Weights and Biases, and generally like you kind of like your professional background, because I mean it, it wasn't as a CRO at a public company. How about that?
Yeah, so I wanted to be like an AI researcher. Turned down an offer from Google to work at Yahoo back in 2005, so I'm a genius. Yeah, and then I basically worked as like an ML engineer for a little while before starting Crowdflower, which is like a data labeling company that changed its name to Figure Eight and then sold, and then I started Weights and Biases.
Yeah, so prototypical engineering background, but in this case, like particularly with a ML AI bent back before it was hip.
Hell yeah.
And so, you kind of mentioned this earlier, but you started out, the initial hypothesis was, hey, this persona is going to be important, right? They're going to have needs. How did you kind of hone in on the the specific kind of like problem case, and that ended up being that first use case that really hit? Like, was it customer interviews, or how did you guys go about that?
Well, I'll tell you the real story. It's a little complicated, actually, but it
Great,
might
it
be
always
interesting to
is.
your users. So, actually, it was towards the end of running Figure Eight. Actually, my board had fired me at that point, so I was like a little bit idle, and and I actually was trying to afford a house in San Francisco. I was newly married. I didn't have a lot of money, and I was actually feeling pretty bad, that I didn't have enough money for a down payment on even the most basic San Francisco house. I
It's not small.
it's not small. Yeah, yeah. I started teaching AI classes on the side to engineers to make honestly to like make extra money. It was like
I love it.
and and that was interesting because it was actually kind of like in teaching people, you sort of see what happens when you get started with AI. Like, you could build a model, but then it was a little bit hard to actually even see what it was doing. And even to like show your model to other people in the class was kind of hard in any like tangible way. Like a lot of these models, like, you could build a face detection algorithm, but then it was actually a lot of work to even show is the model, it's to show like a picture of a face and see if it detects the face is actually a little bit of a different thing. Um, and so that was one. And then I went to OpenAI and I was like, hey, can I be an unpaid intern? And the company was like just chaotic enough that they kind of let me hang out there and work as an unpaid intern. Um,
So great.
and so that also was sort of a similar thing where I was kind of like, I was kind of doing stuff like I was trying to help them build like a system to pick up objects. And so it's kind of like running into like a lot of issues. I mean, there was like no shortage of issues. I mean, the problem back then was not that people didn't think there were issues. They just thought the market was too small to back a company in it. So you just actually didn't have any companies trying to make tools. So it was a funny moment where there was, like plenty of obvious, pain points, but
Problems.
just no interest. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, um, it's funny. We started with one that people really, really thought was niche. Like even the AI researchers thought was like too niche, which was like,
I don't know, Lucas. I only have this problem once a quarter,
yeah. Well,
but it's
people
a
really,
huge problem.
well, it's like it just seems so basic. So it's basically like you just want like an automatic graph of like how well your model's doing. So it's literally just like you just want to take your models are saying like, hey, I'm doing this well at each like kind of step. They look at a little more data, they get a little better, a little worse, and then they I just wanted a graph of like, okay, is my model getting better or worse? And so it's like this little like logger was kind of the first iteration. And the funny thing is actually there existed a logger at the time that worked really well, but it had this flaw, which was that it wasn't hosted on the web. So you'd have to run it on your laptop. So then if you want to share it with your boss or your colleague, you'd have to take a screenshot of it. And so we basically made a simple hosted version of that so that you could just share the that graph with your colleagues.
That is a awesome minimum viable product. And
Very
like,
minimum. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, but come on, I think that that's where a lot of times, like Segment, supposedly the, progenitor of the customer data
Dude,
platform,
that
whatever, it
segment
just
story
started out.
that is true story. I remember when I first saw segment, I was like, this is really useful, and there's no way this could be a company. So I actually
Yeah,
I used that like segment when it was one library. Yeah,
but
totally.
yeah, just like, event tracking, event logging abstraction. Anyway, like
Yeah, totally.
you'd be shocked. This is a very common thing that shows up in these conversations, and I think the important thing is that like you're in an area that has substantial growth in it, and then you just have the option, ball control on all the incremental use cases there. I also think that what you described about being so close to the metal, where you were doing it like I was a teacher, kind of a AI ops manager, right? If you will, or like an AI
Yeah,
manager of like a
definitely not a
bunch of.
manager. Definitely I was an IC.
No. I mean, when you were teaching,
Oh, yeah,
or like
yeah,
you were an
totally.
erstwhile manager of
Yeah.
your pupils,
Well, the
right?
amazing
And
thing
so,
about teaching actually is that you watch like 100 people on board at once, and you watch it under extreme duress, where if like anybody fucks up, they're like really upset, because they paid like $30 for your class, and now they can't like do the class. So you really like want them all to like onboard successfully. So that actually, I think of one of the big keys to its devices was that the onboarding was good in like lots of environments, and that was totally because we just had 100 people like onboarding these cohorts where I was like terrified that they they wouldn't be successful.
phenomenal. But I
Yeah.
think a constant theme is being extraordinarily close to the metal, and seeing that, and then it gives you the opportunity to identify those narrow, white hot. What, like, it might be narrow, it may not seem like a giant TAM, but boy howdy is it a huge pain in the ass right here, right now. Great story on validating that hypothesis. So, how did you get someone to pay for it? And
Well, you got
who are the first customers?
well. First, we tried to get people to use it, and I mean, we could like force people to use it in the class, but actually getting people to use it for work. I mean, I think with dev tools, it really is a challenge to get people to use it. Um, we literally would go to people and we'd beg them to try it, and then we would set up like weekly meetings. I mean, yeah, we set up like weekly meetings with them just so we could like see them not use it. I remember this guy at Toyota, this guy Adrian. He was just sort of like, I don't know if this is like useful, but I'm like really interested in like trying new stuff. And I was like, okay, like let's set it up. And then we didn't get it set up in the first meeting, but we had like a next meeting schedule, and then we like, got it set up. And then the next meeting, he's like, okay, I haven't really used it. And we're like, well, like why not? And he has some like BS reasons. And it's like, okay, let's like we'll keep setting you up. Let's see if we can get you using it. So there are a couple. I mean, I actually think we probably tried a lot of people that sort of bounced out. Um, yeah, I mean, we got a handful of people using it before we asked them for money.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, in the kind of like the staircase, stepwise progression of founder-led kind of selling, one of the things that I tell folks that they need to validate initially is, one, like, is there a problem to solve that people agree with? Because if you're solving a problem that nobody has, that's a
totally.
great way to make sure. That's a great way to waste a lot of time and money. And then the second thing is like, did the magic beans that you created actually deliver utility? And like, if people aren't going to use it, right, then it's highly unlikely that the magic beans are going to deliver utility, because you need to create value before you capture it. Now, of course, there's like a loop there where, if the pain is sufficient magnitude, then you can get people to pay for skin in the game, right? Then oftentimes can compel that, etc. But of course, doing that still means that you have to validate that utility is being created. Otherwise, you're going to have, a big pile of churn on your
Yeah,
hands later on. And also, I think in engineer in like dev tools, one of the big things there too is that engineers are fussy about software.
totally.
So if they don't like if you don't if there's if there's rough edges or stupid shit, they're going to be highly intolerant of that. Which I think the approach that you're describing can kind of help with that. So the first thing was getting people to use it, and then we had some initial customers, and I think what you said there was that early on, a bunch of those customers actually were in the tens of thousands of dollars. What do you remember who like the first couple like big-ish customers, like actual big kid customers were?
I remember actually the first big one was Toyota. So I think we got a couple customers at like $1,000 or $2,000. But yeah, like the guy from Toyota, that was great. I mean, because at first he was really skeptical, and we kind of just kept, like plugging away at him, and then he's like finally using it, and then he gets like, um, some of his friends to use it. So we start to see like, okay, there's like more than like there's a couple people, using it, here at Toyota, and so that was like the first real like negotiation we had. And I'm trying to remember, it was a funny one where like we'd charge people like a few grand each time. We tried a couple different models, just really having like no idea
Right.
what was
Different pricing models.
different pricing models, yeah. And I think the Toyota one we went in with like we said it's like 100K, and then I think they just said yes, and then we kind of felt bad that like we're like fuck, we should have gone in like even higher. So
300.
that was just like, but I remember being like really scared to even like throw that that number out, and then it was
100K.
like okay, yeah, exactly. And the funny thing is, like it's not like I sort of thought for that like, oh yeah, this is gonna be like huge, but actually no one else was really ever willing to, was never that generous. So I don't know why it like worked so well that one time.
What was what was it, like seat based, or what was the like did they have like 100
We
researchers or
ended
whatever, and
we
you're like
ended up
100K for a platform for 100 users, or
yeah, something like that. Yeah, like 100 users or whatever. But I think back then we sort of like had a platform fee and a user fee, and then we kind of realized people it's better to just have a user fee because like people would use it more than people would end up with more users than they thought, and so we kind of changed it to
yeah,
all
so
user based.
why have a platform fee that potentially creates friction there versus people just like
Yeah, because
slowly
it seemed like
accreting.
procurement would kind of look at it as like just what is the cost of this. They weren't that tactical about so we just sort of had to like get the buyer to have like agree to it with a straight face and not feel like we were ripping them off. But then yeah, so that's where it ended up.
What was that roughly per user?
Well, we would shoot for like we'd shoot for like what was it like kind of like 4 or 5 grand per user per year, and that was always like a real sticking point. Like I mean, I think like I think if we who knows, everyone else ended up pricing like us, but I think usage-based pricing might have worked better. Like if we could send a message back in time, but it would require a lot of patience. Um, like but yeah, we were just charged for user. It was like kind of simple. Um, you know, everyone kind of sort of knew how many users they would have, so it would get through. The problem was just that we were like higher than all the other things that people paid per user for, so they would be like
Totally.
kind of pissy about it.
They'd be like, what the hell is this? Right?
Yeah,
Well, I mean, I think this is a perennial challenge with dev tools is, and I see this with folks that I work with all the time. We're like, a Salesforce seat is a Salesforce CRM seat is like $150 per rep per month or whatever. So, nets out to anywhere between like 1,500 or 2 grand a year or what have you. But then the problem with dev tools is that you have like GitHub, which is like, I don't know, 50 cents a month or whatever the hell it is per user. It's like wildly inexpensive,
yeah,
which then
exactly.
creates this like floor. And so then people perceive that and they're like, wait a minute, why are you like this? And et cetera. And it sounds like you guys encountered that. But the good news is that, this is always a two-edged sword with new categories is that the ML AI researchers, like, they didn't have an existing tool chain, I don't think, to index off of. So at least there wasn't like, well, the other thing that they use for the AI stuff is much cheaper than.
No, but the
I guess
problem
you
is the
became that.
problem is they all used GitHub, so they were all anchored on
Of
GitHub
course.
anyway. So it's like it was always some griping.
Was that like the a number one objection? Was like, why the hell are you guys like 10 times more expensive than GitHub? It's like, well,
Yeah,
because that's been around for 20 years and like and it's not all that complicated. Whereas this is,
I
actually,
mean
how
the other
did you
thing is,
justify that?
well, the other thing, well, I'd be like, look, this is like a purpose-built, thing for a specific problem. But I mean, if you look at for weights and biases on Reddit stuff, the complaint that you'll find everywhere is just that people were mad how expensive we were, and it's tough because like, we had kind of a PLG model in the sense that like people would come in and use us, and they would look at our pricing. And the tough thing about ML researchers is like, a lot of them are just out of school. They're like incredibly price sensitive, even though now they're like, managing often like hundreds of millions or more of like compute spend. But they would be really so we always struggle with like what pricing should we put on our website, because they would come in incredibly price sensitive. Over time, as there'd be more value, they would be much less price sensitive. And actually, as higher you go up in an organization, there'd be like a much higher willingness to pay. But if we didn't get them using it like out of the gate, then we wouldn't be successful. So we put kind of like a low price on the website up to the first 10 users. But then people would feel kind of tricked, like when you have to go to like an enterprise plan above 10 users. But that's actually where teams would be like getting a lot more value
Totally.
out of the product. So
Yeah, it's like you essentially had like a non-linear, you had like a bend in the value curve right there. I think Jira did that
Jared does that,
way
yeah.
back in the day.
They still do
Like,
it. I mean, that's why we had that happen with Jared, and then we felt more okay with our pricing. But
they're like, what are you guys doing here? It's like, we learn from the best.
yeah. It does feel wrong though. I mean, I totally, I understand where people are coming from.
But I think what you're describing right there is extraordinarily important, right? Like, where what we're trying to do from a go-to-market standpoint is we're trying to deploy a technology into the market in a rapid, like as rapid as way as possible, where we can capture value. And so sometimes there are kind of like non-linear parts there where you're like, okay, cool, I can sneak in here, and this is kind of reliant on like the physics of your go-to-market. Where if the person who's going to be adopting this thing, especially in dev tools, may be an end user who's going to be the one who's like trying to figure it out versus like a top-down sell, then we need to make it inexpensive, like low cost, either time cost or expense budgetary cost, in order for them to try this out, which of course is like that's where open source go to market business models have come from, et cetera, et cetera. So um, anyway, you have to get in where you fit in, and not be. And oftentimes, this is why different go to markets have similar shapes, because the buyer type and the user type, and also how the organization buys, kind of have echoes across that. Anyway, don't beat yourself up for it. It worked out just fine. Um, so so how did, like, I think you're talking about this like early on, you had a lot of these folks who were really price sensitive, and you would start with kind of these end users. Did you iterate your ICP much over time? Although I suppose you started with like Toyota, which is a very large organization. Did you like, how did you eventually hone in on exactly like who was a great fit customer for weights and
A great for
biases early on?
customer. The funny thing about actually I think that one difference with dev tools and a lot of other things is like, I think dev tools tend to be less vertically focused, and it's the we never really were successful even doing vertical marketing. It's not like we were against it, but basically, companies liked us to the extent that they had a lot of ML engineers, or you'd call them AI engineers now, and that happened in a lot of different industries, kind of at the same time. So actually, what we would do in order to know if a company was likely to buy us is we actually got pretty sophisticated. I don't know if we got pretty sophisticated. That would be a stretch. We spent a lot of effort
Sophisticated
trying,
enough.
sophisticated enough, more sophisticated than some, at like just trying to count how many ML engineers they had. And so like it's because like even like okay, like one thing that's interesting, pharma. I still don't even understand this, but like some companies really invested heavily in AI and had like huge teams of ML engineers and are like great customers. And some pharma companies like never invested in it and are still not customers of ours. And I have like no idea like why that is. Like it's like, and so it's sort of like, we're relevant to the pharma companies that decide that they want to have like a drug discovery process, like using AI, and we're completely not relevant to the ones that don't. And that's kind of true in other fields, although other fields tend to go more completely or not. But yeah, I mean, one of the weird things about weights and biases is like we're so spread out over industries. It's kind of fun. I mean, we're in like ag tech, manufacturing, like
That's cool.
insurance, like finance. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's kind of fun for me because I get to see all these like
Weird use
businesses. But it's kind of
cases.
like if we wanted to
Yeah.
do vertical marketing, it's like unclear where we would even begin.
Yeah, but I think that what's cool about that is the answer to that question is like we thrive wherever there are AI researchers or ML engineers, and it just turns out that that can be in a variety of different places. And so just like getting in front of them is the way, like getting in front, like identifying the organizations that have those folks present. It's not going to be, size of organization. It's not necessarily going to be industry, et cetera. Is kind of the number one thing. And I suppose like LinkedIn's probably pretty okay for that, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, the
Maybe
problem is they
like
all name themselves different things, so you have to like
yeah,
figure out like all
like a
the weird
taxonomy.
ways that they describe themselves. Yeah, but yeah, that's the main way to do it. And now we look at job postings too, which can be telling. But that's really what we do.
Yeah, I think that yes. Uh, Back to the segment example, one of the things that my buddy Raph was their early sales leader, and it was just really funny to see how organizations, like the only thing that mattered for them was organizations that had lots of events. And so you could have, right, you could have these organizations like Anheuser-Busch that were doing as many events as like some mobile company, right? And like, so their need was like similar, which is just predicated on like how many events they needed to to capture down, and that ended up being the high order bit, which unfortunately like kind of hard to identify externally 100% of the time, but of course was like super important in discovery. Is like, all right, like how many of these things you need to capture down. um, so you had mentioned this about identifying organizations that have how many AI engineers or ML engineers they have in-house, and then unfortunately that was, there were lots of verticals. What were some kind of early customer, like what was the first customer acquisition channel that like really was great for you guys, would you say?
Well, you mean like for new
Yeah, just
selling?
like like getting these folks, like getting these folks attention to be like, oh yeah, like I do have that problem, and weights and biases seems like a great way of solving that. Like how would you get in front of those?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so we we had some tricks for getting people using us, and so I think that was like the biggest thing for us. So we got a lot of people using us like pretty early on. And that was like, I mean, we had a really strong kind of influencer marketing thing happen because people were really like passionate about our product. So they would actually like social media, Twitter was like a big one, but I think like an underappreciated one that actually kind of secretly works better was integrations with open source repos. And so, and that worked really well because it was like at the exact moment you need weights and biases, you would find us. So the weird thing about like starting with us is you would like our on the people would come and they'd be like, okay, your like website flow sucks, And it's well, actually like nobody really goes through our website's flow. The real flow is like you're using some other project like Hugging Face or something, and then you notice in the Hugging Face documentation that there's like a weights and bias integration. We make that really easy. You like instrument that, then you're like running it, and now it's like, oh, you need to make like weights and biases account like in order to use this. So you're coming in out of your terminal actually typically at that time. And so it's actually like attribution is really hard, but we did some tricks. But I think we know that like basically the main way people found us was finding us in a third party repos documentation. And a lot of times it's funny because these are like open source repos, so they're not like totally rational actors. Like sometimes you send them a PR and they're just like, "Fuck you," you're a company. And sometimes they're like, "Oh, like thank you, like that's amazing." What I mean? You kind of don't even know, And then it's like hard to tell like how, how many users you're really going to get out of somebody. So like we got like medium sophisticated at it, but I think the good thing was we kind of like kept at that instrumentation to the point that then we kind of became the standard because it's like anything you're using, you'd find an integration. So it made the product better, which is another reason I liked it. But I actually think that ended up being the main discovery mechanism for a long time. And then in the end, it was students actually. So like we got a lot of student adoption, like actually ubiquitous, student adoption, and that again took a while to kick in. But as like the students kind of graduated and went into industry, that's what I think like fuels, the growth today. But it's always like, we want companies to use us to some extent before we'd go in and try to sell them, even though the buyer wasn't really ever the user. We would look for usage and try to triangulate to the person who would buy us.
Yeah, so I guess it's finding places where someone would identify a need for weights and biases, and largely where that was in these open source repos. And in that case, what was the thing that you were doing a PR in, like it seems like you were sending them a PR
Yeah.
for a doc update. What was the hyperlink to?
Oh, sorry. So what we'd want to do is we want to make an integration where if they like set some flag in their code, they would get some value out of weights and biases. So like they just set a flag and now it's like on, and now it's logging to weights and biases. But then in order to see it, they have to like click on a link because it's like a web app where they see the login. That was like that turned out to be useful for people because it's like even like a couple lines of instrumentation will really slow down a developer. Like it's like there's cognitive overload. There's so many reasons that you wouldn't want to just like go try a new library. Like if you can get like real value straight out of the gate, and if you're in the third party repo, you kind of know what it's trying to do, so you can log the things that matter to whatever that repository like wants to log off. And so you try to give people value really fast, but then it also serves as like a discovery mechanism because like you're looking in the documentation of a library you're using, not us, and maybe you're thinking like, I wish I could see a little more about like what this library is doing. Oh, there's like a visualization thing with weights and biases. If I set some like environmental variable or there's like some flag or whatever made sense for that repository, I can get that thing to turn on and start like logging to weights and biases. And so that was the typical discovery mechanism.
Yeah, so I think yeah, it's like a variant of like open source kind of go to market here, where essentially it's like leaving breadcrumbs in these libraries in a way that wasn't, an obnoxious advertisement, but instead was like high utility to the individual themselves. Like, hey, that I need some instrumentation. Oh, look at this, it's right here. And
Yeah,
then
totally.
also, uh, presumably to the person who is administering the repository in question as well. Maybe some of whom are full Stallman and are like, get this shit out of
Yeah,
here,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
But maybe others are maybe a little bit more user centric, and they're like, you know what, that actually does make sense for that hook to be
Yeah,
in there. Um,
exactly.
excellent. And then the student one was that. How did you like? Did you guys do anything in particular to like promote that, or did it just kind of like because you had the low cost, like to your point about you were teaching and you identified the need and you had a low cost, free version or
Yeah, I mean, well,
non-commercial version?
we made it free for students, and I think also because I had been teaching, I think I kind of probably just like snuck in a few features that made it good for teaching classes, or just I had that like, that mental model was really like on my mind, when we did it. So I think that caused teachers to use it, and then when teachers would use our tool in a class, then it's like that's amazing because now all the students are like using it. You know what I mean? And then they would take it with them into companies. Yeah.
I mean, that is how Texas Instruments completely eviscerated HP's calculator
Is that
business.
right?
Oh yeah.
It wasn't the like not having the reverse Polish.
Well, I mean, the reverse Polish notation was like, I mean, that wasn't easy. But all of us, I mean, 40 years ago or 50 years ago, HP kind of shipped one of the first meaningful, like, handheld calculators. Like, I think my dad still has his. It's not an LCD screen, it's like an LED screen. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. My dad has
Um,
one too.
Yeah, and
Totally.
then and then like TI just went in there. Yeah, I mean, I think this the student go to market can be very effective. Apple has always done a phenomenal job of seeding that market
You have to be really
as
patient, though.
well.
I mean, that's the thing. You have to. It takes like years, right, to really bear fruit, I think.
Yeah, I mean, but so my buddy Sam Bhagwat from Mostra is kind of doing a variant of this right now, where they've he wrote a book called Principles of AI Agents, and I swear to God, they've like handed out north of 100,000 of these these books. They're not that big; they're like this big or what have you, and they're kind of doing a similar thing with with CS organizations as well. Whereas I think uh, probably lends itself in an emerging category, or like a new kind of like a new category, or like a new area of expertise, probably lends itself to that, right?
Yeah,
Versus
totally.
probably less useful to show up after like the market has played out and been like, hey, students, here's 7-minute abs, right? Or 6-minute abs version of relational database or whatever. Use ours versus like something that is doesn't actually have an answer quite yet. Okay, got it. So those were two good channels there. Um, what were some customer kind of acquisition channels that like never worked out that you kind of tried and you're like this does not work? Any of
Well,
those?
SDRs. I mean, I read your book, and I tried a
Let's
million
have a
different.
bunch of SDRs calling engineers. That'll be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we tried many different variations of SDRs, and honestly, it was always unsuccessful. So yeah, that was like a disappointing thing because I'm not, I thought it might work, to be honest, because it wasn't like they were calling the individual engineers; it was like the bosses. But yeah, yeah. So that one never really worked, but it might have been bad
Who's the
execution.
who was the boss persona in that case? Would it be like the VPE or CTO,
Yeah,
or was
like
it
VP often, yeah. So like I think other things do work, through that channel. I think the problem that we had, the funny thing about our go to market was that like no one except the individual contributors ever really got the value prop. So it was like we never, we were really never able to articulate the value prop in a way that anyone else like really cared about.
you had to
Um,
you have to use it to get it, bro?
yeah, I mean, we really tried. But boy, we tried. Because I do think if we could figure that out, it would have really unlocked a lot. But it just like, I mean, a lot of the advantages that we had were kind of hard to explain. It was sort of like, um, our UI was a lot better than anything else, and people like loved that. But it's like it's hard to like convince someone, to
It's
buy
not
something
in
because
it.
UI. And any feature like comparison matrix, like Amazon and, Google would like kill us. You know what I mean? So it was like I felt like we would almost like our ethos was like, okay, we're going to lose these like feature comparison things because we want to make like really good software. Um, but we kind of had to let the individual champions like advocate for us and like push for it. And like, you try to make these ROI calculators, but like you make developers more efficient. No one cares. Like no one cares at all. So it was kind of like more like the best thing we could say is like, look, you're having trouble hiring AI
Yes.
engineers, probably you want to use the software that they want to use. Like, just go ask them what they want to use. Like, just ask them. That's all. That's my only ask is like, go ask them what they want.
Yeah, and I think I mean sounds like Linear's go to
Yeah,
market like product strategy, right? I talk about this a lot with because oftentimes founders they'll erroneously like cargo cult somebody else's go to market. They're like PLG or die. And it's just like, all right, well, like, let's actually think about that, right? Like, do you have a non-complicated product? You have a complicated product. Well, I have a very complicated product for a non-technical audience. Oh, okay. Let's not do PLG there, right? Versus, places versus a non-complicated product for a non-technical audience like a Notion or a Slack or a Zoom or what have you. Um, the problem, of course, being that also those non-technical audiences oftentimes, at least the end users, don't have a lot of juice in the organization. Whereas fussy, scarce human capital that have opinions and also are a pain in the ass to hire and you don't want them to attrite, well, it turns out that those folks oftentimes have more juice, right? And you see this with like, the success of Figma in the face of Adobe DXs. And like, I'm sure there's a bunch of product stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it was like designers wanted to use Figma and they were just like, I don't give a shit about your Adobe enterprise license. All my homies use Figma. And so I want to do that too. And it
Yeah.
sounds like, like the same sort of, whereas we saw this in go-to-market tech, there were a lot of companies that thought that they were going to do PLG go to market. Like, hey, like a buddy of mine ran this company called Scratchpad. There was like this Ajax layer that lived on top of Salesforce, and it was lovely, right? Because like Salesforce is a pain in the ass. Like every time you got to save something or like edit something, whole page refresh takes like 15 minutes to reload or whatever. And so they did this like Ajax thing that was like really great for engineer, and it worked great. Sorry, for salespeople, it worked great during ZERP, where people are like, "Oh, we
Right.
gotta make sure we can hire these account executives, and we don't want to piss them off. They might go to whoever, Tiger Global just dropped $50 million on, etc." But then as soon as like, ZERP ended, those go to markets are like, cool, use Salesforce, you don't get the shiny front end on top of that, right? Whereas AI engineers, designers, dev tools in general still probably have that like level of juice. Don't poke them, right? Don't poke them, let them use the thing. So what were some go to market so that's like a DevRel thing. And what were
Yeah,
some
yeah.
things you did aside from product to make it such that weights and biases was like the beverage of choice for the discerning uh, AI engineer?
For the individual using it?
Yeah. Yeah, aside from the product, because like obviously you guys are phenomenal software craftsmen and so on and so
Oh,
forth.
aside
But
from the
outside
product.
of that,
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I guess this is a little bit product, but I feel like this was actually growth, and I feel like sometimes product can be growth. I mean, one thing we did that like we could never do. I could never convince people to do it now, but we did like a year wrapped thing. Like Spotify does like year wrapped, so we would do like year wrapped of like how many like runs did you use and how many like GPUs did you use and stuff. Actually, it's
it's
funny.
awesome.
We launched one of
I
the
love
things we
it.
tried to do to get like centralized buyers to like us, the infrastructure teams, is we we would like show how much resources teams were using. Um, but actually, the the infrastructure people didn't really care, but the users would like treat that as like a high score board for themselves because they like wanted to
I'm
be like
gonna
using more
steal.
resources.
Look how many GPUs I used. Look at that.
Seriously, seriously, they'd like it, yeah. And then so we
Oh
like
my God.
released
It's a measuring contest. Lord.
kind of. Although it's funny because I mean, I just like I love our users, so it's hard to be mean about it. Because and it's actually the year wrap thing is funny because it worked really well on social media because everyone wanted to post it because it's kind of a humble brag. But then it's like it's funny when I ask people for feedback on the product. That's like often where people's brains go. And I even met a couple where the the like husband was like met his wife because he was kind of bragging that he was in the top 1%, but then his wife was in
Love
the
it.
top 0.1%, so she just like went over the top. And then he was
That
like really
that's
interested
cute,
in it.
honey.
Yeah, but
Go
that
change the
definitely
baby's diaper.
wasn't part of some strategy. But that I do think like some kind of delightful product features can really like work
I think
in a fun
But I
way.
think that's exactly what I think what you realized who had the juice, and then you were investing in that, both from a pure product standpoint, and then also looking for opportunities where you could do things that would deliver delight and utility to the end user, but maybe in a way where they would like share that with each other, share that with other people. I mean, I guess like the earliest MVP of your product was that analytics use case that that was inherently viral because like you could flick the URL to
Yeah,
your
yeah,
manager
totally.
and be like, here it is, right?
Yeah.
Like, versus screenshots or what have you. Okay. What one thing that oftentimes is challenging in these developer sales motions is you have love at the IC level, but then you got to get up here to the leader level. And like you were saying earlier, if we showed up there and there wasn't usage here, it's not like these guys were going to come off the top rope and be like, everybody needs to use weights and biases. But if they were if the organization was already filthy with weights and biases usage, then that would be a much more productive conversation if we can precipitate that conversation. So what were some of the mechanisms by which you would then precipitate that conversation with those directors or VPs, assuming that the organization already was, lousy with weights and biases
The reality, just for your
distribution?
audience to know, it's like I don't think we were quite as like rich as like GitHub, where we'd wait for like 30 people to be using it and just like sit back and like wait for them, to, we if we saw one person, using it, we would try to, to get meetings, and we'd really try to go through that person because they liked us, so we would like ask them, hey, who could we talk to about, getting something in place here. And I mean, that was the main way. Like we tried a lot of we put out content for that person. Like a lot of our marketing efforts were more targeted, at the boss. And occasionally we'd land on something that worked well. Like, it was a real power law. Like we had a couple things that they really liked.
Always.
Yeah. And we
So
would
do a lot of experiments.
Yeah, exactly. And so we'd make it easy for them to reach out and buy, and I mean, so I don't think it was any magical thing. I don't think we were like masters at it, and it was funny because it's like sort of like we would just hope they would come in like not like hostile to us, you know what I mean? Like if they were like neutral, like that's like,
You were just hoping that the leader, the director, or the VP wasn't pissed that somebody was like erroneously or like guerrilla using weights and biases.
Yeah, that happened all the time, actually. Like, people would standardize on one of the top down sold, products, and then there'd be like a guerrilla thing, and like, we'd be, trying to wait for the right time, like trying to get like enough kind of purchase in the organization. Sometimes we could get like like a manager to buy it in like a pocket, especially like where sometimes there were like, the people that know like LLMs are like really special and they can kind of do whatever they want. And so like, they would get to buy us first, and we'd sort of get the like little
Goes to
install
the
there.
juice, right?
Yeah,
It goes
exactly.
to the goes to the juice model of PLG.
For
Who's
real.
got the
Yeah.
most juice in the weighted average,
Well, someone
juice
said
like
like the gradient of admiration. I think this really worked for us, where it was like,
oh, that's a great phrase.
yeah, it's a great phrase where we try to go to the top of that. Like we kind of had like these celebrities. Like this guy Andre Karpathy is like a big deal in the AI world, and he would be like, "Oh, I love weights and biases," and that would be like honestly the best content. Yeah, or like he'd always use us like in his open source projects, and then like, yeah, I think it was stuff like that.
Just
Honestly,
take like screenshots of his tweets, and then like literally it's like the outbound email, or it's like
for
your
real.
first slide is like, well, nice to meet you today, Bob. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I have that Andrei Karpathy tweet just sitting on my desktop there? You've
Yeah,
heard of him before, right?
yeah,
Interesting. So it's almost like, oh, I love that because it's kind of like the Ferrari model,
yeah.
right? Where like Ferrari, actually, I was listening to the Acquired podcast on Porsche and how maybe less Ferrari because like Porsche is more of a like a it's a luxury, but it's also like a very broad luxury. Like Ferrari only sells so many other so many cars, but like Porsche ships like a lot of cars, but they invest extraordinarily much in their racing, right? Not because anyone like they don't make money on that, of course, like it just sets money on fire, but that it percolates down to via the gradient of admiration,
Yeah,
which is my new
honestly, Pete, I think it's underrated in the developer tools because, like,
totally. That's a great point.
if you go to like an executive at like a random company, I guess I don't want to name names because it's like, okay, a company's not tech forward. They
The
understand that
CTO of Monsanto,
you said it, although Monsanto may be more tech forward than you would think. But anyway,
John Deere,
John Deere, important weights and advice to customer. I love you guys.
National
And
Cash
I
Register.
can't even do this. Okay, I don't know.
It's
Let's make
actually
it
so funny
competitive.
because like Monsanto bought Weatherbill or Climate Corp or whatever, so I'm sure they do insane ML stuff. And
Honestly,
then
both Monsanto and John Deere are terrible examples. They have really good ML teams that
yeah,
do
well
awesome
yeah,
stuff.
because John Deere bought a bunch of ag tech companies as well. Anyway,
The
sorry.
river. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, totally. Anyway, I can't even name one. But anyway,
Barney Rubble's Rock Repository.
yeah, yeah. They do have different issues than like Google, and they know that, and so they don't they're not impressed. Like the VP of
They don't care.
engineering at Barney's Rock Company is not impressed that like Google's using your tool.
Ooh, Andre Carpathy.
But the engineers don't care. Like they want to go work for Google eventually. They they want it. They don't want to use the baby tools. Like everyone, it's funny. Back when we were starting, everyone's talking about like the democratization of AI, and I was like, this is such a stupid message. Like it's a good message for VCs maybe that like we're democratizing AI, but I was like, I don't think people want to use the people's AI tool. Like they want to use like the really good AI tool. And
Yeah,
so
like I'm a craftsman. Do you know how like expensive my knives are?
yeah,
And my like I have yeah, I'm a like what Ryobi? Get out of here. I'm a DeWalt guy, right?
is DeWalt high end? I feel like
I
DeWalt's
have
kind of
no
like
idea. I
basic.
think there's like four at this point, and like they all do it's the same mechanic as like Chevy versus Ford. But I think the point is well taken, which is like I think the thing that I'm taking away from that is that if these people, if the ICs have juice and also want to tell themselves a story about about excellence and that so not only should you invest and make the product high quality, right? But you should also make the branding and the go to market reflect that, right?
Yeah, but
Versus
Pete, I gotta say, I really actually okay. I don't want to say it cynically because I actually think like it's like insane how little we spend on developer tools.
it is crazy.
It's just insane because it's like actually
It's like the GitHub
productivity.
thing, like makes my like I feel that if GitHub like raise their prices by like two orders of magnitude, it would like help developer go to market like so much better because then people would actually be like, okay, cool. Like
Well, I think they found a different path to monetization that you'll experience if you use other parts of their product. Um, but it's fine. Yeah, and like I think actually the CoreWeave acquisition kind of made sense because it's like so much more natural to pay for infrastructure, versus developer tools. But it's really crazy to be cheap on developer tools. And like the fact that we had the money to make high quality tools, I feel like immensely like proud of that we like helped all these different companies like actually like build things more efficiently. And I mean we talk about like 10x developer productivity gains, but if you took your ML engineers and made them 10% more efficient, we're like
the
ludicrously cheap.
yeah, the salary expense
Insane.
is just bananas,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
this is a component of pricing when founders are starting out. Like, maybe you index off of other stuff. There's of course like, like how do you help make money? How do you help save money, et cetera? But, you know, the salary expense, oftentimes people get like I don't know, time savings, et cetera, et cetera. But again, if you have people who are extraordinarily expensive and you don't want them, it's like the jokes about CI/CD, like, okay, cool, I'm going to kick off the build and then like go home for the day at like 1 p.m. or whatever. Like if you could not have that happening,
Yeah.
right, with your $300,000, $600,000, seven figure a year human being, like that's probably worthwhile, and maybe shouldn't be $1,000 a year for their seat. It should be $4,000 a year for that seat. Yeah, and then your go to market should reflect that from a branding standpoint. Yeah, again, non-cynically, but from a branding standpoint, et cetera, et cetera. I think that could be very impactful. Now, doing that with doing that for kind of like lower cost users or like software that services lower cost users, probably gonna be a little bit tougher, right? But like if you are close to a high amount of like economic intensity, then probably leaning into that is not problematic.
I would just say to like people listening, it is hard because like I think we could not have picked a higher paid, like more demand persona, and it was still really
Totally.
hard for us. So
Yeah, still paying.
yeah.
Yeah. When it came to CS, like customer success, I think the interesting thing here is that you guys didn't, it wasn't top-down sold. So you didn't like go through and like resell a bunch of people and like, you got to use this because the CTO says you gotta. Um, but still, like I imagine you would have like patches of usage, and then maybe you get an ELA, and like you need to penetrate across the rest of the organization. What was particularly important for your success motion early on?
Yeah, it's funny. We had this thing where we would try to get like deeper into our customers' like infrastructure. So
Mhm.
like what happened is like people would
Like integrated?
yeah integrate. So people would like start by integrating us into their kind of toy stuff, and that would be like researchers who liked us. But then if we could convince the infrastructure team that usually didn't like us to like bake us into like the core like infrastructure they were using. I mean, usually there was a team called like the MLOps team at the time. Now they're called like AI ops. And usually they wanted to build like everything, because that was sort of their purview. And usually like the researchers had like mixed feelings about them, but it was like they were kind of just wanting things to work. But then there was like this MLOps team that felt like a little competitive with us.
Yeah,
And so
totally.
we got like I think again, we just wanted the MLOps team to not hate us. Like that was like,
Right.
and so we would just try to like make our stuff where you didn't have to like use it all at once to get value out of it. So we tried to make it all like, you could like kind of buy into whatever your
I'm
thing
gonna use
didn't
that
have.
part.
Yeah, just whatever. Like, if you have like your own versioning system, great. Because like everyone for some reason built their own versioning system. So it's like, all right, we have ours, but like we'll work with yours, or like whatever it was. And so and that was actually all in the effort to try to get people to bake us into their, because like our usage would kind of like be like it would go up users, like we do like little like mini upsell, mini upsell, mini upsell, mini upsell, and then there'd be this moment in the best accounts, like John Deere. I can just think of as a good example. Although they'll probably kill me if I hear their name, but whatever. It's been years of work with them, where they would like jump to like a massive install, and what that was like
Getting hooked in.
yeah, getting hooked into the to the be like a default. Like so when like you start a new project, now you're using weights and biases. So we would try to like we had different. Again, I don't think we did that perfectly, but we would really try to make that happen. And then a lot of the function of the CS team was to try to like encourage that to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you have kind of like land and expand behaviors, one, making it easy. There was another founder-led sales story with Carl Hansen from Tonic, who kind of talked about this about, you know, landing where you can get in. And I think you mentioned that earlier about landing maybe in the fanciest group of AI
Right.
engineers. Oh, that's the LLM folks over there. Yeah. But then making it then easy for them to then buy more, and then maybe not just easy for them to pull more, but also like maybe push a little bit there as well, and that oftentimes that looks like integration with additional tooling or what have you, and not just being passive about that. Like that's where CS can actually be very very helpful. And then I think the ability to kind of choose your own adventure in especially when you have a a part of the organization that potentially can be hostile to you. Like we had this with Atrium, where we had a two-legged sales motion. We had sales operations and we had sales leadership. And usually we're pretty friendly with both. We just kind of had to talk out of both sides of our mouth with those folks. Like with RevOps, we have to be like, "Oh, it's so frustrating. They don't appreciate your dashboard art, do they?" Like, no, they don't. And then with sales leadership, it'd be like, "Man, those nerds, they never deliver what you want, right?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's the worst." And so we would do a pretty good job of that. But but the BI team always was just like super hostile because they're like, "That's our job.
Totally.
That's our job. What are you doing? That's our job." And
Yeah.
and so I don't think we did an amazing job of this. It actually was the results of this, precipitated some pretty painful churn situations where we hadn't been aware of that as we should have been. And I think probably the way of doing that would have been what you're describing, where it's like, hey, no, we're not, no, your Tableau castles in the air, they are lovely. You support the CFO, you support the CEO, you support the board. This is this thing for these unwashed sales leaders over here who honestly, do you really want to interface with them? No. Right. And so it's just kind of like, cool, this is not, it's not going to touch your cheese, right? It's okay. And I don't think we did a phenomenal job of that. And we probably could have done much better to make sure that to play nice, especially in large organizations that where like you start having internal functions who are like,
Totally.
hey, I'm supposed to be doing.
Well, we had this hilarious dynamic throughout the history of the company. It's kind of like in the last year or two, I feel like this happens a lot less because our brand is bigger. But it was always like, oh yeah, like we'll buy you for now, but just so you know, we're like building, we're building you, so we're gonna like take you out. And I like it,
Sure, Jan.
the first year or two, I'd be scared, and then I'd be like, this is actually really good because it means they have a need, and like nobody ever built us. There's just too many other things to build. It.
Yeah, I think one of those things you can do is I was talking with a team I coached the other day about this is like when you identify those sort of objections ahead of time, and you know that they're actually like defanged, you can actually kind of pull them forward and be like, oftentimes in organizations that are as sophisticated as yours, sometimes people are considering building this on their own, and I understand that. And and honestly, sometimes people will do that, but in the short term, you don't want to eat that productivity loss on the part of your AI engineers.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so a lot of times people will start with weights and biases before moving on to something that's a little bit more purpose built.
totally. That'd be good. Yeah, you could.
Yeah, okay. See, we're not enemies. We're not enemies. Like it's okay. You're just gonna rent us, for the short term. Here,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not trying to replace you, Bob. I'm not trying to replace you. I love it. Well, last kind of part here, I want to pivot to actually, how many customers did you sell? Were you primarily doing the early sale? Was Chris helping out on that?
No, well, so it's kind of like in the very early days, it was me doing the sales, and Chris is kind of like the sales engineer. Was sort of that's kind of always how we've done
Love
it.
it. It's
Um,
great.
and then yeah, we got this guy Ari actually. I just to give him credit because he came on very early. He was my first sales hire at Crowdflower, and then he came back and did it again for weights and biases. So he was kind of magic at that too, and that kind of gave us a little bit of a dynamic where sometimes he could go in and suggest a price, and then the customer could get mad and come to me, and I'd be like, "Oh, he's crazy!" Like,
Mom.
yeah.
Um, how many before Ari joined up? How many customers would you say that you had ended up closing ahead of that?
Like 10. I would have gone longer, except I just knew Ari. He's almost like a co-founder.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially I talk about Crowdflower so much um, when I'm talking to early. Mainly, I talk about Crowdflower and weights and biases to young founders a lot about the power of having extraordinary like subject matter expertise and how just like being around the thing that matters is going to put you in the like it's going to have you poised to strike.
It's a really
And
nice thing to say.
all the time, like I talk about it constantly, right? Because if you think about it, like you guys were so close to so many things, it's like so funny to watch everybody like Scale and Surge and Mercor and all these guys essentially doing what Crowdflower was doing with like Mechanical Turk stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
You can imagine I have a
fa-
slightly different reaction to that, but yeah, yeah.
no, but like I mean, look,
Totally.
being early is is frequently indistinguishable from being wrong, right? Like I know this, I have had many situations like this as well. But if you are like in the mix, and then I think you characterized it so well early on, where it's like we are going to be the most expert at this persona and whatever their needs are, and like they're going to pull us in the right direction, and it's going to be good, right? Um, and I think the human capital component of that is non-trivial as well, where you guys had about like you knew exactly what your roles were, like Lucas the seller and Chris is the sales engineer, and then it's like okay, cool, we have repeatability on this. We figured out that this experimentation thing really seems like the early kind of like thin edge of the wedge, like the wedge product. All right, Ari, tapping you in, right? And I think that's fantastic as compared to where it's a little bit more risky. You're like, no, 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 I gotta tighten down this sales motion. I gotta repeat this like 20 or 30 times so it's idiot proof because I don't know who my first seller is gonna be versus maybe like, it's, actually I know the idiot I'm gonna hire and I know I know his frailties. So it's actually okay. He can take this half-baked thing and run with it. I think that can be very powerful.
All right, you're not an idiot. You're a miracle worker. Just if you're listening to this,
You're the
you're
man.
the man. All right.
You're the man. Uh, Wonderful. Well, you know, if there was a parting shot that you had to offer to someone who's in your shoes, like at this point, I guess it's like 5 years ago or so. You guys were at that, that very early kind of like first 50 customers or what have you. What would you kind of offer to folks, especially folks who are doing developer sales motion, maybe like AI focused stuff, what have you? What would be, a thing that you would offer folks there.
I guess maybe one contrarian view that I have that I feel kind of strongly about that maybe is helpful is like, I think if you pick, if you pick a consistent like persona and you care about them and you're like serving a few of them well, I think you're likely to be successful if you stick at it. And I mean, I say this like my first company, we went like 12 years and it was unclear that it was going to be successful. So it's like you might not, be successful. But I kind of feel like right now things are changing, so fast, and there's so much like opportunity to like serve people well and like value there. I do think there's like a little bit of like a craziness with like, kind of companies, going from like 1 million to like 100 million ARR like overnight or something, where I think people maybe bounce around too much and get a little too discouraged when you really have to like push someone to like use your product and buy your product. And I think it's okay if like, you really have to like, push people for like a good long time. And I don't know, I feel like people kind of give up too soon, kind of pushing their product on people. Like I don't know. I see that in like companies that I invest in and, advise sometimes. Like I kind of wish they would just, I don't know, push a little harder and, make the product better. Cause it's like, that's like the value. It's like when your product's like really good, like of course when your product's new, it's bad. It should be bad, and it's like, you got to keep like, keep pushing. And then, I think you probably, if you push long enough, it'll get good. And then, like, I mean, software's so amazing. Like every segment is like valuable if you can win it now. So
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think that looking for, I think what you're kind of describing a little bit is like founder market fit or like founder like user market fit, where like if you one have passion or like intellectual curiosity about that topic, or like which in you guys' case you're like the kings of I mean early on data labeling and so on and so forth, so you're like, all right, we know those things, right? I think one, making sure that it's something that you're excited about is a good thing because it's going to be a long haul. And then I think the other thing as well is just being honest about the fact that like, is there a lot of um, commercial intensity there, where like in you guys' case, there's a lot of commercial intensity around like AI engineers and ML engineers and what have you. And commercial intensity, of course, can be a small number of like high intensity human beings, right? Or like business processes, or it could be a lower intensity, but there's a lot of that, right? Stein from Lassie was on here, and it's like they do this, AI automation, AI like billing automation stuff for like dentists, and it turns out that like, the individual human who would be doing that probably costs like, $80,000 a year or what have you, but like it's in the flow of like millions of dollars of billings for the dentist office, and it turns out that there's like a bajillion of these dentist offices, right? So like when they were identifying that, they're like, okay, cool, we can be excited about this. There's tons of like commercial intensity in here. We're going to go full like ethnographic research and like sit in their lap and actually do the coding behavior and so on, like the billing coding behavior and so on and so forth, to really nail the hell out of this problem, because we know that there's a lot of commercial intensity here that we can take a slice of for ourselves.
I mean, I guess maybe this goes against like your like I don't know, your kind of go to market orientation, which I respect. But I do think like when we started, there were actually a lot of competitors, like a lot of different, like every take you could imagine on our market, even though it was small, even though it was nascent. But I kind of feel like people like got distracted by like making their product actually like good. Like I mean, I saw products that were kind of nicer, like kind of nicer onboarding, like like products with way more kind of go to market energy, behind them. Like I kind of saw like every variation. I think like we had good vision, but the vision was maybe similar to a lot of other, companies in our space. But I think the way we like out executed the competition from my perspective, I wonder if my co-founders agree with this, but my perspective is like we actually kind of just listened to what customers wanted and gave it to them relentlessly in a way that it didn't seem like our competitors were doing at the time. And I'm kind of, I think that often could be, the winning strategy, because it's not like we came out of the gate with the best product. I mean, I even remember we had a customer who was just like, I want to buy your product, but like the UI is so garbage that I like can't even like take you seriously, you know? And then I was like, okay, like UI master customers will prioritize it, But
Hey boys, guess what the next sprint is on?
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I don't know. Like I don't know. I guess maybe I don't even know what I'm saying, but I do think like just sort of like that kind of relentless iteration, with customers trying to like make it a little better, a little better. I think it's kind of underrated. Like I wish I had done that more with my first company also. Like I think that would have like kind of served us better.
Yeah, like stay close to the metal and react to the pull
Yeah,
as
exactly.
it shows up, which I think oftentimes, unfortunately, as founders, we want to abstract and look for like, okay, like what's the meta pattern here, right? Like, oh, I don't want to get stuck in a local maximum here. And it's just like, man, just go up,
Yeah, totally,
right?
totally.
Which I think that the YC guys do a pretty good job of like talking about like the common failure modes are like, don't worry, dude, your common failure mode is not that you end up at like a local maximum. The common failure mode is that you ship something that people don't want, or you're not responsive to your customers, or you spent so much time, making this abstraction when all the customer wanted was for you to hand them the pepper, and like you spent so much time making an abstraction for passing an arbitrary condiment that
Yeah,
they've
exactly, Pete.
decided
Thanks. See, that's what I was trying to say. You should
they
edit
churned
me
they,
out.
they churned and they went to
Totally.
someone who would give them fucking pepper.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah, exactly.
I love it. Well, Lucas, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me. I'm sure this will be super helpful to folks who are engaged in developer sales motions, especially of an AI variety. And I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.